Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. A critical role provided by a healthy legacy press is sense-making of the world around us. They're just like giving us just information. It'd be great. So what happens when the legacy press is so corrupted by ideology they can't serve their sense-making function for society, their information distribution purpose? You end up with a very confused society. You have a society that can't navigate reality. They don't know what's true and what isn't. Take, for instance, legacy media's handling of three hugely important stories. First, the JUSSIE Smollett story. Smollett? I can't say it except the Dave Chappelle way. If you recall, JUSSIE Smollett is the Hollywood actor. He was in the show called Empire, who decided to fake being beat up in an alley by two Trump supporters. It was entirely a hoax. Everyone knows that it was a hoax. It was a ridiculous hoax. And the story is so, I have no words. The hate crime hoax trial began yesterday, but you're not going to hear much about it because the legacy media wants this story memory hold. The second story is that of Waukesha, where Darrell Brooks, a black anti-Semitic rapper and a big-time BLM supporter, just decided to drive his car through a parade, injuring 62 people, killing 6, including an 8-year-old boy. And the third story is that of Kyle Rittenhouse. Watching how the legacy press chose to cover each of these stories really illustrates just how broken America's journalism is. So the fourth estate's sense-making, their whole purpose of distributing information, I don't think that that's what they're in it for. It's dead. Like this idea that their fealty to information distribution is dead. And America's actually worse off for it. So start with the JUSSIE Smollett, and I can't say it any other way, and his fake hate crime hoax. So 3 years ago, JUSSIE Smollett hired two brothers from Nigeria to dress up like Trump supporters and pretend to mug him in an alley at 2 a.m. during the polar vortex in Chicago. So from the beginning, nothing made sense. So one, what were two supposed, and at first they said they were white Trump supporters and then footage came out. What were two black Trump supporters doing in an alleyway at 2 a.m. during a blizzard carrying rope and bleach? You guys heard how nobody bought this story. His injuries also seemed fake. The story didn't add up, but it didn't matter. Legacy press wasn't going to ask questions, really. They embraced the hoax totally, as did Democrats. AOC tweeted this, quote, "There's no such thing as racially charged. This attack was not possibly homophobic. It was a racist and homophobic attack. And if you don't like what's happening to our country, then work to change it. Blah, blah, blah. I still cannot believe that this tweet exists," end quote. You might expect these kind of declarations from AOC, but it wasn't just her. It was also the VP, Kamala Harris. She decided to ratchet up the racial hysteria another notch and didn't wait for the actual facts to come to light. So she actually had tweeted this. She wrote, quote, "JUSSIE Smollett is one of the kindest, most gentle human beings I know, and I'm praying for his quick recovery. This was an attempted modern-day lynching. No one should have to fear for their life, blah, blah, blah. Modern-day lynching. A homophobic hate crime," she said. We already knew everything that we needed to know about the JUSSIE Smollett story. It was a modern-day lynching. It was so bad. MAGA. Oh, you horrible people. And now we all understand that partisan Democrats who wanted to amplify division and racial hatred in America, of course they're going to react this way. They're not going to wait for no facts, nothing. The media also ran with this, and they decided to amplify all of it. In fact, here are just a handful of hot takes from prominent writers in the legacy press who, without lifting a finger, bought the entire story. This is what we should expect in Trump's America, the media told us. Now, of course, JUSSIE Smollett is going to go on trial for this total lie. Just sidebar here. 2 a.m. during a polar vortex, blizzard conditions, wearing a MAGA hat, and apparently the guys, we know exactly what they bought and when, because they're literally on closed circuit television buying kidnapping supplies at a hardware store. I'm not making this up. They put their kidnapping wares on the counter and then they paid with a check. And in fact, I think it was Shaquille O'Neal who made the joke that, was it kidnapping in the memo or something like that? I think it was him. It was hysterical. I'm actually surprised, as they said on Fox last night, that JUSSIE Smollett is even up and walking around and able to go to trial, because pretty sure Dave Chappelle murdered him during the Sticks and Stones routine that he did all over the country, right? Doesn't matter, though, what the truth of the story was, which that it was completely, entirely set up because Jussie Smollett wanted to get more pay on his series Empire. The damage, though, was already done. It was a very deeply divided America. He dialed up that racial division to make a name for himself. He's a racist. And Legacy Press went along with it. Now, the Chicago police chief, he said this about this hate crime hoax. Watch.
Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile? How can an individual who's been embraced by the city of Chicago turn around and slap everyone in this city in the face by making these false claims?
I like the woman who's over his left shoulder, the Chicago police superintendent at the time, because you could tell she was really wanting to go, that's exactly right, that's ridiculous. You could just see it in her face. Chicago police chief's honest appraisal. It was a reprehensible lie perpetrated by this Smollett. It's the kind of honest take that we should actually really get from our legacy press. And it was a really much needed refutation of this whole ridiculous, racist, despicable thing that he did. Now, after all, if a lie like this was allowed to persist, imagine the permanent and irreparable damage, not just to Chicago, but the fabric of the country itself. But Legacy Press didn't offer any kind of perspective like that. Once the story wasn't useful, they decided to move on and look for the next story that fit their narrative. Now, think about the story that's happening right now that's playing out in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Darrell Brooks, a man with black nationalist sympathies, super anti-Semitic. I mean, there are receipts all over social media. He's called for violence against white people, drives his car through a Christmas parade, injures 62 and kills 6. But the media, far from rushing to any conclusions, they won't even talk about Darrell Brooks at all. In fact, here's CNN's headline: Waukesha will hold a moment of silence today, marking 1 week since a car drove through a city Christmas parade, killing 6 people and injuring scores of others. A car did this, that damn car. That's what I mean, right? Sense making. CNN just made the whole Waukesha massacre less sense. A car drove through the city Christmas parade? I mean, not even Teslas drive themselves. A physical man with hands named Darrell Brooks drove that car into a parade filled with people. A lot of white people, kids. The man happens to be a big giant racist, and he also shares Hitler memes online. But because Darrell Brooks is a racist and because he's not white and he ran over dozens of white people participating in a Christmas parade, legacy media is not going to talk about him because it's too close to Kenosha, and boy, oh boy, they don't want to have to dispute their own narratives. A car committed the massacre. That's what you get. The car did it. Dang car. We need common sense car control. So the media is going to embrace a fabricated hate crime, but they're actually going to ignore a real one. And even Joe Biden himself, he's not going to talk about career criminal Darrell Brooks. It's just a tragedy that has nothing to do with terrorism or race. Biden can't even admit that that's really what this Waukesha massacre is about, race and terrorism that's perpetrated this time by a black criminal. And that would undermine the idea that the real threat to America is, no, not climate change, it's white supremacist domestic terror. See, it's white supremacist domestic terror Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Tuesdays and Thursdays, it's climate change. Get it right. Here's the president failing to inform the public about actually what happened. Watch.
Well, we don't have all the facts and details yet. We know this morning that 5 families in Waukesha are facing fresh grief of a life without a loved one. At least 40 Americans are suffering from injuries, some of them in critical condition. And an entire community is struggling to cope with the horrific act of violence. My administration is monitoring the situation very closely.
Now, suddenly, Joe Biden is very concerned that we do not have all the facts. He is unwilling to jump to any conclusions, like, Democrats and the media did with Jussie Smollett, or like Joe Biden himself did on Twitter with Kenosha. He treats Waukesha like it's an unfortunate accident. Based on the legacy press and Joe Biden's response, you could be forgiven if you thought it was just a big tragedy, not a possible act of terror. Now, speaking of Kenosha, contrast that with how Joe Biden reacted to Kyle Rittenhouse's case. Biden tweeted out that Rittenhouse was a white supremacist and part of a white nationalist movement. For real, he tweeted it out. The tweet lives on. And unlike Darrell Brooks, there's actually zero evidence that Kyle Rittenhouse was a racist. Yet Joe Biden tweeted that Rittenhouse was an actual racist and white supremacist anyway. White 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse with zero criminal record killed 3 white men. Black career criminal Darrell Brooks ran over a bunch of white people after screaming about white people and Jewish people all on social media for months and months and months. White Kyle Rittenhouse never said a racist thing online ever. And we know that because the FBI searched Rittenhouse's phone, and they searched all of his social media and everything else, and so did all the legacy press and all Democrats. Darrell Brooks constantly said racist things online. Again, he literally shared Hitler memes, and I mean not like making fun of Hitler. And he advocated for violence against white people, and legacy media doesn't even entertain the idea that Waukesha is a true hate crime, an act of terror driven by racial animus. Only racial animus, I guess, that goes against their narratives. It's a hatred for a different race by a black criminal named Darrell Brooks. Now, Joe Biden apparently thinks so little of the massacre in Waukesha, he's not even visiting the site of this act of terror. Here's Jen Psaki telling us why. Watch.
Obviously, any president going to visit a community requires a lot of assets, requires taking their resources, and it's not something that I have a trip previewed at this point in time, but we remain in touch with local officials, and certainly our hearts are with the community as they've gone through such a difficult time.
He had no problem going to his beach house on Labor Day. He had no problem for Thanksgiving going up to that billionaire's mansion in, Hamptons? Why wouldn't Biden bother to stop by Waukesha and meet with the grieving families? Because it requires lots of assets to get him there. No, actually, it's because if Biden goes to Waukesha, it will highlight a narrative that the administration and the legacy press don't like. Because they would prefer that the massacre and this racist and career criminal, Darrell Brooks, just goes away. Just like legacy media would prefer to ignore JUSSIE Smollett and his fake hate crime hoax. I mean, literally on camera buying kidnapping supplies. Both of these stories underscore real racial problems in the country, but the problems are not coming from the people the media is telling you that they're coming from. They're coming from the progressive left. And legacy media cannot abide with you understanding this truth, because the world might start to make some sense if you grasp this reality. Now remember, according to legacy media, racism coming from white conservatives, we're told day after day, it's something that only white people who they're capable of it, and especially if they're blonde. I'm assuming, right? Isn't that what kind of they all say? That's the Democrat legacy media narrative, and any story that shows this to be untrue, they will suppress, they'll ignore, they'll lie about it. Black actor JUSSIE Smollett was literally willing to stoke racial tensions in America by making up this ridiculous hate crime and denigrating millions of Trump supporters with his racial hoax. A black criminal, Darrell Brooks, runs over a bunch of people who are predominantly white, and very likely did so because he hates white people and apparently parades and dancing grannies and children, and his social media clearly shows this. So meanwhile, you had white Kyle Rittenhouse shoot 3 white men in self-defense, and the jury agreed. And to make proper sense of the world, the legacy media should affirm these facts. I mean, it is reality. Isn't that how like the little, the pyramid for journalism goes, right? But sense making of the world and actually reporting the fact, that's not their duty. They're all propagandists, advancing the narrative and political agenda, that's the goal. Legacy press needs you to not just be uninformed, but misinformed. They need you dumb and confused. It's critical to controlling you. But America, unfortunately, the country is the big loser in all of this. The fabric of the country is being pulled. Any nation or society operating on the basis of lies, that's a country that can't navigate the world. If it can't navigate itself, can't deal with the world. And you can't move forward as a country if we don't even know what's true and what makes sense. Did you see the number of people who were like, I thought Kyle Rittenhouse shot black people, and that's why everyone was saying he was racist? That's what progressives were tweeting. They were angry because the media was suggesting that it was black people at a BLM protest that Kyle Rittenhouse purposefully targeted. And when they actually watched the trial and realized what was happening, they were livid over this discovery. We're tribalizing and turning on each other as Americans, and we're doing all of this at a time when so much racial progress was made in this country. It just doesn't make any sense. And that's because legacy media is not interested in helping you make sense of the world. They're only interested in manipulating you and making money off of your division. Soon we'll be joined by Senator Rand Paul, but coming up next, we'll get you up to speed on that challenge, Mississippi state case, challenge to Roe v. Wade, a potential challenge that the Supreme Court is set to hear on Wednesday. Mallory Quigley of the Susan B. Anthony List joins us next. Black Rifle Coffee develops their explosive roast profile with the same mission and focus they learned as military members. And being founded and operated by veterans, they know a quality cup of coffee is important to active duty troops who are away from home for the holidays. So they're committed to supporting those who serve. With every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. Today's the last day of November. So every time you purchase coffee today, a bag of their limited edition holiday roast will be sent to a service member overseas for Christmas morning delivery. Help the cause. Visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV. Check out the freshest coffee in America. Use code DanaTV and get 20% off coffee, apparel, and gear in the first month of the Coffee Club. Welcome back. The Supreme Court is set to hear a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade beginning tomorrow. The case comes from Mississippi, where a ban on abortion after 15 weeks is being argued. So how are the justices going to stand on all of this? We'll talk with Mallory Quigley. She is the VP of Communications at the Susan B. Anthony List. Mallory, thank you so much for joining us. This Mississippi case, as I understand it, you're also looking at Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and also could challenge Roe v. Wade here. Talk to me a little bit about this case and what makes this case, because I know that there were a number of challenges. What was it about this Mississippi case that this is the first one that's being considered, and what kind of impact is this going to essentially nullify? Like I know the challenge with Texas's law and some of these others. Give us the legal insight on that.
Yes, this is the most significant opportunity that the Supreme Court has had in 2 generations to correct the gross overreach of Roe versus Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and all those terrible abortion decisions. So, pro-life lawmakers across the states, Mississippi, Texas, and elsewhere, they've been passing pro-life laws at an exponential rate, especially the last 10 years. So much of these bans on abortion at 20 weeks, at 15 weeks, disability discrimination abortions, sex discrimination abortion bans, all of these are getting caught up in the legal system and going through litigation. The court can do whatever it wants. It decided to take up this case out of Mississippi and has said that the justices are going to answer specifically the question of, are any pre-viability bans on abortion ever constitutional? And so this 15 weeks, that's before what is considered viability, which has been a moving target. When Roe was decided, viability was considered 28 weeks. Now it's closer to 21, 22 weeks. So clearly, viability as a concept is arbitrary. And so what's so important about this case is that the Mississippi Attorney General, Lynn Fitch, she specifically asked the court to said, hey, to answer this question and uphold our 15-week abortion limit, which is very reasonable, very moderate, it doesn't comply with Roe versus Wade. So you have to overturn Roe and subsequent abortion decisions. So Mississippi's case is giving the court an opportunity to correct Roe versus Wade, to take the handcuffs off all the states so that they can pass laws that reflect the values of the people that live there. So yes, it's going to impact what's happening in Texas and really across all 50 states. It's a major, major opportunity for the court.
And even, Mallory, apart from the values of it, there's also the legal value. I was really, in the past couple of years, I have been reading a lot from, and I was actually surprised to read it from the source, more progressive attorneys who have issues with the violations that they say Roe v. Wade established because it actually completely exceeded the court's authority. Talk to us a little bit about this, because that aspect absolutely fascinated me, and it does make a lot of sense because it affects other things unrelated to abortion too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, think about it this way. In 1973, 7 out of 9 unelected justices that were all men, we don't hold that against them, but it's just a fact, they undid in a single day every single state law that had been passed at that point limiting abortion. They legislated from the bench. They made policy. And for 50 years nearly, 50 states have been hemmed in by this Supreme Court decision and have been prevented from using the democratic process to debate and find consensus among the duly elected lawmakers who are elected by the people. And so it's a complete overreach. It's an abuse of the system that our government, that our founders gave us, that policymaking belongs to the legislative branch of government, and the execution and the enactment of that policy belongs to the executive branch. So the justices just need to focus on the Constitution. And in 1973, they found a so-called right to abortion in the Constitution. It's online now. You can pull up a PDF, do a control find. There's no such thing as abortion in the Constitution. So this is the correction that the court could make is key. And we hope that they will correct themselves to get out of the policymaking business, retain what credibility that they have left, and allow lawmakers. In Mississippi, they want a 15-week abortion limit. In Texas, they want to protect babies when their heartbeats can be felt. All of these things speak to the humanity of the unborn child, which is evident from the moment of conception. But Democratic consensus is going to look different depending on where you live. But the court needs to take the handcuffs off the states so they can do their jobs.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to have you can't have the right of in pursuit of liberty without the right to life first, and then the pursuit of happiness and liberty. What gets me too about this is, from what I understand, and this, I'm not a lawyer, I play one on radio, but from what I understand over this was ultimately structured as a privacy issue, but then it was such a reach to say that privacy, like protections and accommodations, exist to abortion on demand, which is a wild stretch to me. And apparently there were some Supreme Court justices that also disagreed with this. Of course, they never were all on the court at the same time, but that's remarkable.
Yes. Even the late Justice Ginsburg, said, I'm paraphrasing here, but that Roe was very poorly reasoned, and that the court essentially, for political reasons, they were trying to reach a certain conclusion, but there really wasn't any legal framework or framework in the Constitution to get there. Pro-abortion legal scholars have long derided the rationale used in Roe to give us abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. And they've created the status quo that we're in. The United States is one of 7 countries in the whole world, including China and North Korea, that allows abortion beyond 20 weeks, in fact, all the way up until the moment of birth, well past the point that the baby can feel pain. So who knows what those justices in 1973, what their intention was, but they created this unworkable. They thought they were settling the abortion question in the hearts and minds of the American people and in American law, and that simply hasn't been the case. This year alone, more than 500 pro-life bills have been introduced in state legislatures. 100 of those at this point have passed. And I think this just speaks to the desire of the American people to protect human life under the law, and this unrest that we have with the framework that Roe has given us, which is completely unworkable. But yeah, you're right that even pro-abortion scholars have long said, this wasn't well argued. And Justice Clarence Thomas, God bless him, he's the most outspoken pro-life justice on the court, who's specifically called for the overturning of Roe versus Wade. He said, once you get a decision you like, you keep crying stare decisis, going back to precedent. But that we have tons of precedents in the history of the court. Dred Scott, think of Dred Scott, that had to be overturned. They were clearly wrongly decided. That's the case here.
Schenck v. United States. Brandenburg decided that 60 years after.
Exactly.
Yeah. One last question for you, Mallory, on this, because you're talking about the justices in 1973. I know we have a conservative majority, 6-3, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get a conservative decision. I think the right found that out with John Roberts when it concerned health care. And I know during the Reagan era with Sandra Day O'Connor, there were some things that were discovered. What are you anticipating with this conservative majority slate of justices?
Yes, well, the Chief Justice has absolutely taken over that swing role vacated by Justice Kennedy. We're, of course, hoping that, you need a majority of the justices to decide to take up the case to begin with. So we're hoping that they wouldn't have taken this up if they didn't have the appetite to make a major change. But these Supreme Court justices, they don't live in a vacuum. They are seeing, the lawmakers, the legislative branch. We hope that they see we've heard from tons of legislators on the Hill today, like Vice President Mike Pence today, saying legislators and executives are ready to debate and find consensus on this. Let us do our job.
There you go. Well, we're going to be watching this to see how this plays out and hoping that rights in life went out on this as well. Mallory Quigley, thank you so much for what you do. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, folks, remember yesterday we played you this clip of Dr. Fauci calling out GOP senators and proclaiming himself like his own person. He represented science. So one of those senators that Fauci named, Dr. Rand Paul, he's going to join us next to respond. Don't go anywhere. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers are still abysmal and inflation is still skyrocketing. Instead of following the former president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills we can't pay for. Take proactive steps and protect your wealth in retirement by investing in gold and precious metals. Legacy Precious Metals can help. Washington prints money to pay for their outrageous bills that just devalues your dollar. Gold offers you a hedge against inflation. The dollar gets weaker, gold is stronger. Check out the folks at Legacy Precious Metals. They're the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals. They have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com.
So anybody who spends lies and threatens and all that theater that goes on with some of the investigations and the congressional committees and the Rand Pauls and all that other nonsense, that's noise.
Golly, it's noise. I mean, they're just our elected officials who are asking questions on behalf of the taxpayer. That's a republic. And that was Dr. Fauci, a self-proclaimed representative of science. He sounds an awful lot like a political scientist and takes a jab at Senator and Dr. Rand Paul. We wanted to give Senator Rand Paul some time to talk about this, and because he actually is in medicine and understands this, whereas it's like he doesn't really get the treatment and the respect that I think he should from Fauci in these discussions. He joins us now. Senator, it's good to see you. I was shocked at this because, and I love the back and forth that you have had during the hearings. I'm curious as to what sort of authority Dr. Anthony Fauci thinks that he has, and I want to get into some of the gain of function stuff because I know that you guys have sparred over this, and I'm thankful that you have because I think from that we've been able to get more answers than we ever would have. But I'm just curious as to where he gets the authority to make such proclamations and basically push these policies. He's been asked more about politics than science.
I think his degree of arrogance is astounding. The fact that he would argue that any attack on him is an attack on science. It conjures up images more of the medieval church, when the medieval church was repressing science and the medieval church decided what science was. See, I don't think science really should ever be under the edicts of, government dogma. And that's sort of what it's become, is you can't question Anthony Fauci or you're questioning science. It's basically an attempt to immunize himself from any kind of criticism. The problem is that he's often ignored the science to be in favor of mandates that actually contradict the science. So when he's coming forward and saying everybody should be vaccinated, mandatory vaccination for children, he's doing that because he's ignoring the fact that over 100 million Americans have already had COVID. He was asked about natural immunity. He says, oh, that's interesting. Someone should look into that. He's disingenuous, he's dishonest, he's lied to Congress about the gain of function, and we've actually referred him formally for charges from the Department of Justice. We think that he has lied to Congress and committed a felony by saying that they did not fund gain of function research in China when indeed they did.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of faith in Merrick Garland actually pursuing that, which I want to get to here in a moment. You mentioned the vaccinations for kids. One of the things that, Senator, that I haven't been able to find is what kind of data points has anyone at CDC or WHO or NIAID or NIH or wherever, what kind of data points in terms of safety have they been able to give parents? Because I sort of feel like these are the same bureaucrats that messed up lockdowns. These are the same bureaucrats that were funding what was supposed to be one of the safest virology labs in the world. Clearly it wasn't. I don't think that their definition of safe matches mine. So I'm just kind of curious when they say that these have all gone through this safe and thorough process. What is that?
Well, the interesting thing is when they've studied vaccines in children, any children that have already had COVID, that have already had the flu, are excluded from the safety trials. The reason they're excluded is because they already have immunity and they couldn't prove whether or not it helped them prevent them from getting the infection because they've already had the infection. But also as a consequence, we can't necessarily say it's safe in children who have already been who have already had the disease naturally because they're excluded from the studies. We want to know this precisely because children or adults who have already had COVID get an extremely strong response to a vaccine. That might be good, but it also might be related to some of these autoimmune reactions or these inflammatory reactions of the heart they call myocarditis. So we really would want to know, and in fact, I think it's malpractice to offer vaccines to kids without first asking or testing them to see if they've already had COVID. Because frankly, if my kids have already had COVID, I think it actually might be a danger to vaccinate them. So giving the vaccine without knowing whether someone had COVID, I think actually is medical malpractice.
And it's a shame that we can't even have these discussions without someone saying that it's anti-vax simply by asking questions, which it kind of blows the mind. I wanted to get to the point you had mentioned just a little bit ago, charges for Anthony Fauci and whether or not Merrick Garland's DOJ is going to follow up on this. What really I think shocks me more than anything, and perhaps I think every other American taxpayer, what in the world were we doing, Senator, funding this stuff with the Communist Party of China at a lab that the CCP ultimately has oversight on?
Yeah, what an incredible lack of judgment. And even since the pandemic arose, Fauci's been asked, do you trust the Chinese? Would we do this again? Or should we continue funding this lab in China? And he steadfastly argued that we still should fund research in China and that we still should collaborate with the Chinese Communist government. I think that this shows incredibly poor judgment because I think that we could get a worse pandemic. I think this may be the warning sign that if we don't really understand and learn from this, that we could get another pandemic that comes from a lab that maybe has 50% mortality. What if you release a virus that is man-made that has 90% mortality? I'm not alone in this. There are scientists who are not Republicans. There's a prominent one from Rutgers and another prominent one from MIT that are experts in this field. They're not partisan at all. They're not sympathetic to Republicans probably at all, that are saying that this kind of research is sort of risking civilization's very existence. Those are pretty strong words from nonpartisan scientists. And yet we've not had one committee hearing to investigate the origin of the virus or to investigate whether or not funding gain-of-function research where they have man-made viruses that are of unknown potential that they put together and then they discover, hey, wonder if we can find out if it has increased infectivity in humans. That's a terrible idea. And the thing is we're still doing it. Fauci's still for it. And on that alone, he ought to be fired.
I can't, Senator, I can't for the life of me think of what medical advancement could be gleaned from this other than to use it as a form of biowarfare.
Well, and particularly now, because you might have made an argument, oh, we're going to look at viruses and predict what they would be like before they occur. But the problem with that argument is that the laboratory created viruses are not necessarily what will come from nature. Because this is a random mutation where you have thousands and thousands of possible mutations, the chance that you invent something in the lab that's the same as what will occur in nature is virtually zero. The other thing is now that we have the mRNA virus, we can sequence the DNA sequence, the genome of a virus within days and create vaccines. We don't need to sort of say, oh, we've already got it growing in a laboratory somewhere, because we can immediately sequence things that occur in nature. That's a good idea, to sequence the DNA and the genome of an existing pathogen. But to take an existing pathogen and randomly combine it with stuff we find in a bat cave, other viruses in a bat cave, to see what happens is incredibly stupid. It's a Russian roulette for the world. And I can't believe we haven't gotten more Democrats interested in this, because literally we could cause a virus or create a virus that could destroy the world.
Yeah, Russian roulette indeed on this. Do you think that Merrick Garland the DOJ is going to bring charges? Are they going to listen to your requests?
No, I mean, this is the DOJ Attorney General now that's investigating parents. I mean, we tweeted an article out today of parents that were arrested in their home for protesting at a school board meeting. So no, I don't believe that Merrick Garland has any ounce of propriety, any ounce of probity as far as trying to do something to find justice here. I don't think he will. I think he's a political animal, but he's also a dangerous political animal in the sense that he is now sicking law enforcement on parents who are critical of what's being taught their kids. So I don't have any belief that he will actually do anything. But I do believe Fauci broke the law and he ought to be prosecuted. But at the very least, he ought to be removed from office for such bad judgment in still trusting the Chinese after all of this.
I mean, he very clearly was not honest when he was speaking with you, particularly about the gain of function. I mean, there have been some really great independent news sites, and I know you've tweeted this out as well, where, you know, as they would say, slang-wise, you know, they've got the receipts that shows that he's, you know, wasn't being forthright, so it seems obvious that charges should be brought. To this point, how should we best handle this? I mean, I understand, you know, pandemic, you protect the vulnerable. I don't see mandates as being the way to do this. The president was talking about the Omicron or Omnicron, as he would say, variant, and he was asked, are lockdowns on the table? Is this something you're going to consider? He says, no, not for right now. Jen Psaki at a press conference yesterday asked about mandatory injections for air travel domestically, and she was saying everything's on the table. Do you think that that's something that we could actually eventually see maybe after the first of the year? And what would be the proper response from Senate and House to this?
I think it's incredibly important that we learn the lessons from the last lockdown. The last economic lockdown destroyed the economy, but did nothing to deter the virus, did nothing to change the trajectory of the virus. In fact, I don't think anything that government mandated or did changed the direction at all, other than the vaccine. I do think that the vaccine plus natural immunity actually has slowed the virus down and is eventually going to control this virus. But I don't think masks, I don't think social distancing, I don't think any of the mandates, you know, whether you can have a drink in a bar after 10 o'clock, whether you can have 25 people in a hotel or in a bar room, I don't think any of those things had anything to do with changing the trajectory of the virus. And the facts bear this out. So I hope we won't even consider doing something like that again. The other thing is we have no idea whether this is going to be a more lethal virus or a less lethal virus. There's a possibility some viruses become more contagious but less lethal and less dangerous over time. If this new variety that has a lot of mutations takes over but is less lethal, this may well be an answer to how we get out of this pandemic. If it's more lethal, the main thing government could do would be to quickly allow a new vaccine to be developed as well as new monoclonal antibodies. Regeneron makes some of the monoclonal antibodies that have been very successful in treating this. They're worried that this virus is enough different that it might escape those. Fine, let's develop new monoclonal antibodies if we need to. But the main thing is we ought to all take a breath and not go crazy till we know about this virus. The initial reports out of South Africa are that it is less dangerous and less severe than the previous variant. Until we hear otherwise, let's don't let people freak out and begin lockdowns again.
Oh, completely agree. Oh, I wish that what you just said would just be established fact in D.C. I would love that. I want to switch gears, Senator, and quickly get into some of the foreign policy stuff, because you and Mike Lee and Bernie Sanders, there's some unlikely common ground. Every now and then it can be found. I've sent a resolution in, specifically as it relates to arms to Saudi Arabia. The president had greenlit this arms sale to Saudi Arabia in this proxy battle in Yemen with Iran and through the Houthis. And you want to block that sale of arms to the Saudis. My question is, isn't that what the Arab League is for? I mean, I know that the Arab League is probably involved to some extent, but why is the United States playing a role in this?
Well, Yemen is one of the poorest countries on the planet. I saw a picture the other day of a 2-year-old child that weighs 10 pounds. There's starvation across the country. The swollen bellies of these children is just awful to witness. And it's being done because they have to import food, and their food is being blockaded by the Saudis. And so I don't think we should be participating in this war. For a while, we were refueling their planes, but we're still retooling the planes. We're providing mechanical assistance as well as spare parts assistance. We should not be helping the Saudis to starve the Yemenis. I think it's a big mistake, and it just breeds anger, discontent, and thousands of children are dying daily in Yemen, and we should not support it. If we say, oh, they're an ally and we want to give them weapons because they're on our side, well, let's see some behavior. Let's see some behavior changes.
Right.
There's a lot about the Saudis that is not trustworthy. They killed a journalist, chopped him up, and dropped him out of a plane. These are not the kind of people you invite over for Sunday dinner. They have not shown themselves to be responsible, and this war in Yemen is something we shouldn't support.
And the United States doesn't need to be party to this ongoing, I don't know how many decades this has gone on between Sunni and Shia, Iran and Saudi Arabia. We have enough problems here domestically and with China right now to be involved in something that the UAE and the Saudis and Iran and everyone else can solve themselves within the Arab League. Senator, appreciate your time, appreciate your common sense as well, and cannot wait to see the next line of questioning between you and Dr. Anthony Fauci. Thank you for holding the line for so many Americans. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So coming up, folks, have you seen the story about the brothers Cuomo? Chris Cuomo specifically at CNN running cover for Andrew Cuomo. And the media's reaction has been baffling, not just from the left. We're going to get you up to speed on all of that next. Every American is blessed to live in a country founded squarely on the idea that we're free. And many take that gift for granted and labor under this misconception that our liberties are somehow forever guaranteed. But freedom is not a given, and that's why now is the time to support free speech and the voices that fight back. So as a supporter of the First, you get premium content from hosts that you know and love, like yours truly. Access to television specials, exclusive emails, other membership benefits as well. And you can enjoy weekly specials on demand through the website in the First TV app. So join the exclusive Facebook community that will never censor you. Get video calls, chats with the host, access to members-only inboxes where you can share your thoughts and ideas and your questions. Oh, and premium live access from events across the country. So sign up today and you'll get 20% off the first year of your annual subscription. Becoming a supporter of the First TV is easy. Just visit thefirsttv.com to subscribe today and save 20%. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason, because without it, a fire, flood, or burglary could destroy you financially. But there's another major crime that your homeowner's policy doesn't cover. It's called home title fraud. And law enforcement calls title fraud one of the fastest growing crimes, and it can ruin you financially. You need to home title lock. Title fraud happens when a criminal forges your signature on a document stating that you sold your home to them, and then they can take out loans against your home and leave you with the payments, and you'll spend a fortune on legal fees trying to prove you didn't commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a barrier around your home's title, and the instant they detect anyone from a cyber thief or anybody trying to horn in on your title, they help shut it down. Visit HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim, and enter code radio for 30 free days of protection. You might remember during the height of the initial wave of the pandemic that Chris Cuomo would often have on his brother, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, for CNN for these weirdo softball interviews. And they were usually gross, sycophantic displays that kind of play like infomercials for Governor Andrew Cuomo, hyping the great job that he's done on COVID. Of course, thousands of old people died in nursing homes because of Cuomo's policies, but despite that, he got an Emmy for his supposedly amazing news conferences, as you may remember. And again, those were those weekly chats. He also had those weekly chats with his brother, Chris Cuomo, helping the Love Gov along the way. Well, the Love Gov turned out to be the perfect name for Governor Andrew Cuomo, since many allegations began to surface detailing sexual harassment by the governor. He ultimately stepped down, and amidst the allegations of all of this sexual misconduct suddenly pouring in, Chris Cuomo was trying to distance himself from his brother a bit. Cuomo said this, quote, "I've never covered my brother's troubles because I obviously had a conflict," end quote. Well, it turns out that the CNN host may have overtly stopped helping his brother, and he was covertly doing so behind the scenes. Transcripts were released Monday from the New York Attorney General Letitia James to reveal that the disgraced governor used his media contacts to help track down leads on sexual assault allegations. Chris Cuomo did, to help his disgraced governor brother. Text messages and the investigation transcript released by Letitia James show that Chris Cuomo was discussing his brother's statements with the governor's then top aide, Melissa DeRosa, and the transcripts revealed that Chris Cuomo was feeding that top aide, information to Andrew Cuomo, Melissa DeRosa, info on the timing of these articles that were about to drop on his brother. And in one text, Chris Cuomo offered to help prepare Melissa DeRosa, presumably on how to discuss and frame those sexual misconduct allegations. And then Chris Cuomo offered tips and advice on other accusers and leads for his brother. So in other words, Chris Cuomo was using his media contacts to access power and to protect and shape the defense of his disgraced governor brother in the court of public opinion. Now, some people have suggested, even in conservative circles, that this was just brother loyalty, one brother being loyal to another. No, you're loyal to doing what's right. It's not loyalty when you trade your integrity to protect someone, even your brother, because then you're selling yourself out. That's compromise. That's not some noble form of loyalty. Let's not confuse the nobility of loyalty with selling yourself out because you want to preserve access to power. This isn't The Sopranos, right? This is the story of a New York governor who, according to allegations, made a habit out of sexually harassing women and got away with it for a long time. The irony is, once again, all brought to you by the Believe All Women Democrats, until it's a powerful Democrat that's accused by a woman. And then it's don't believe all those bitches, discredit and smear all women. Or in the case of Chris Cuomo, work hard behind the scenes and misuse your access to media power and game the system to protect your more powerful brother, who seems to have a habit of abusing women, and then lie and say that you have a conflict of interest on the air, so that's why you don't cover your brother, when in fact you were literally covering your brother's butt behind the scenes the entire time. It's ironic, and the hypocrisy is insane, except for these are the kinds of revelations that seem to emerge daily, and they now define CNN. CNN issued a statement saying that the transcripts and exhibits, quote, deserve a thorough review and consideration. We'll be having conversations and seeking additional clarity. I mean, how much more clear can you make them about the significance as they relate to CNN over the next several days, end quote. And you also had Brian Stelter, who said, well, you know, Chris Cuomo said that all he was going to say on his program about it, and that was it. This is a guy who hosts Reliable Sources, and he's like this pretend ombudsman for all the rest of media. Yeah. This is the same network, by the way, who put Jeffrey Toobin back on air after he was caught jerking it during an internal CNN Zoom call. That happened. You can't make the shameless feel shame, apparently, and we don't expect any apology from Chris Cuomo anytime. In his mind, he probably believes he was just doing what loyal brothers do, covering for his powerful brother at the expense of women who were abused by Andrew Cuomo. That's not loyalty, that's stupidity. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.